My name's Jakko Jakszyk from King Crimson, and you're listening to the Progcast.
Welcome back to another episode of the Progcast. With me today, calling from the UK, is Jakko Jakszyk. I probably butchered that a little bit. Sorry, Jakko Jakszyk.
It's fine.
Welcome to the Progcast. Thank you for taking the time and talking to us.
A pleasure.
You have a new solo album that's out actually on October 23rd, and this episode will come out a couple of days later. So when you guys hear that episode, the album will already be out. And of course, we want to know everything about it. So, I mean, your solo career has been a little bit sporadic over the last decades. And now you kind of surprise us with a new solo album, a collection of very different songs and a lot of guest musicians as well. So I'm super interested in how you came to collect these songs in this constellation.
Well, there was a handful of songs I'd been writing anyway, and there's 3 songs that I presented to Robert that I've written for Crimson. And we would have this way of working where Robert would come to my studio and he might have a new riff or a new set of chords or invariably a twin guitar, double locked guitar thing. And I would record everything. And then when he goes away, I kind of reassemble stuff and write songs within it, around it. There's about 4 currently in the repertoire that we've written that way, and some others that we will get around to doing at some point. But there are 3 songs on this album that I took to him, and we had this little joke really where he would listen to the song and say, I think this is marvelous. I love this song. It'll be an ideal track for your next solo album. Which, of course, is not very subtle code for we're not playing this. And so I started to. There was some material that was starting to emerge that had a kind of collective thing about it. And then there's a guy called Thomas Weber at Inside Out Records.
Yes.
And for years he's been trying to encourage me to make a solo record, very gently and. But very nicely. So that was part of it. And also I kept bumping into Peter Hamill, who, I was a big fan of when I was a kid. And I've been lucky enough to get to know him over the years. And whenever I bumped into him, he would say to me, have you started making that solo record? And I said, no, I haven't. And the last time I saw him, and he said it again, I said, I'll tell you what, Peter, I'll make a solo record if you agree to be on it. And he said, of course. So one way or another. And this year we weren't touring as much as we normally do. We were just going to normally we tour for about 4 months of the year. And there's rehearsals and preparation. And so it takes up a lot of time. And this year it was just going to be the one tour in America. So it seemed like an appropriate moment to try and do it. Turns out it was an even freer year than I was hoping it would be.
Yeah. So, looking at your solo discography, at least according to the Prog archives, your last solo album was Waves Sweep the Sand in 2009, and you kind of self-released that, or you don't really look at that as an official release? Or
No, my last solo record was called The Bruise Romantic Glee Club, and that was a double album. And then a couple of years later, I released, as you say, just kind of, just off my own bat, I released this collection of pieces that were going to be on that or weren't on that, or so they were kind of outtakes really. So
okay.
It's an odds and sods record, that one. The last proper album was Bruce Romantic Glee Club, which is quite some time ago.
Yeah. So why don't we talk a little bit about the a couple of the guests that you have on the album. I mean, first and foremost, I would say one frequent collaborator would be Gavin Harrison, of course, with whom you are working for years and years now, a lot longer than like he was in Porcupine Tree. I saw he was playing with you already at the beginning of the 90s.
Yeah. Well, I've known Gavin since the 80s.
Wow.
In fact, we were on tour last year, stuck backstage or on a tour bus somewhere, I can't remember. And Gavin was telling everybody about how he started in music. And his father was a trumpet player and played for the BBC Light Orchestra, and he played at the Talk of the Town here in London. So Gavin came up through that route. And he said, so he was used to, you go to the BBC, you record all these songs in the morning and you record some more in the afternoon. He said the first ever pop session he did completely freaked him out because he spent all day playing the same song and they still hadn't finished. And I'm listening to this anecdote and someone said, wow, what was that session? He said it was one of his and it was me. It was the first, and it was the first time I'd worked with him. And I obviously really put him through the ringer, you know. But yeah, he's been one of my best friends for since then, and frankly, I think he's the best drummer in the world. I just happen to know him as well, so he's always my first choice because he plays so brilliantly. He's got a fantastic sound, a fantastic touch, and he comes up with really interesting parts. You know, you play him a demo of something, and he might take the lead, but on the whole, he'll come up with something completely unique that you hadn't thought of. So he's always my drummer of choice.
Yeah, that would have been another question when you are composing for your solo album, or when you sat down and said, okay, now I'm going to do it, and then you invite all these brilliant players. If you kind of ask them to stick what you have in mind, or if you invite them to put their mark on it.
No. I think, you know, sometimes you learn this lesson the hard way. I remember when I first worked with Danny Thompson, double bass player, very famous double bass player. And he's unique and he's got his own sound. And I remember employing him and then trying to get him to play all the notes I'd written note for note. And of course you end up, it sounds kind of, you know, what you need to do is say, look, you're Danny Thompson. This is kind of what I'm doing harmonically, and let them be who they are. And I think you need to do that with the likes of Gavin, or because you get to a point where you can employ a musician to play some notes, or you end up employing that person because of what they do and how they sound, you know.
Speaking of bass players, you got quite some there, like 4 or 5 different bass players on the record.
4. I think it's 4, yeah.
So, did you like handpick them for which song needed which style?
Well, I picked Tony Levin because the 3 of the songs he plays on were written for Crimson, so it made sense to get him to play on it. There was another song called The Trouble with Angels, and I knew he'd do a beautiful job, and he did. Fantastic job. John Giblin, I've worked with a lot. I really like him. He always comes up with an unusual approach. So there was the song he plays on, I thought, I bet he'll come up with a slightly different take on it rhythmically, which he did. The opening track, I used Mark King because I was lead guitarist in Level 42 for a number of years. So I got to know Mark very well. And he played on my last solo record, and Mark's got a load of energy. And he just, you know, whenever I've used him before, the whole track kind of lifts up. It takes a different take. So that's why I used him. And then there are 2 tracks with my son on because I'd run out of money by then, and I don't have to pay him anything. That's not true. He's very good.
All right. So yeah, I already kind of said that the songs are in itself are quite different. So how did you go about assembling them for this album and kind of arranging them to form an album?
Well, I think, you start off, the material kind of dictates where you go in a way. If you're writing this very poignant song, it then tends itself to being sparser and maybe having a kind of ballad aspect to it. Whereas if you're angry, that's, invariably the song will dictate the nature of how you approach it. But then once you start it, I guess it's like painting or sculpting. You start to think, oh, well, what about this and what about that? And then when you're working on an album, I think there starts to be a point where you start to see connections and it becomes this body of work. And it takes a life of its own on, I think, in a way that, you know what I mean? In the way that just writing individual songs and sticking them together, I think once you start working on it collectively, you start to find reasons and approaches that kind of either coalesce together or actually go off as a result of what the previous thing was. So yeah, it starts to dictate itself, I think.
And lyrically, thematically, do all songs have like their own story, or do they kind of also fell under an umbrella of a shared theme, kind of?
No, I think most of the songs are pretty specifically about something, and they're about something that has either happened to me or has touched me on some level. There's a song on there called "The Rotters Club is Closing Down," which is about a drummer called Pip Pyle, who used to be the drummer in Hatfield in the North and National Health. And I started writing that lyric on the way home after his funeral. And I knew him pretty well. So that's very specific. There's a song about being cheated on and fooling yourself, which is something I've only been able to write with the distance of about 20 years because it's too painful near the time. So yeah, there's a different. I'm trying to think now. The lyrics are all pretty specific. There's nothing on there that's kind of amorphous or vague or open to interpretation, I guess. The song with the most recent video, which is coming out on Friday, although when this is broadcast, it will have been out a couple of weeks, I guess.
Yes.
Was inspired again by a real incident. There's a song called "Uncertain Times," which is ultimately about the state of the world and politically, I think, but was inspired specifically by the Brexit debate in England and something that happened on the night of the result, where my adoptive father was Polish, which is why I have that name, but I'm not actually Polish at all. I was adopted. So there was a place that when my father was quite old, I used to take him regularly to in Hammersmith called the Polish Centre. And it's a cultural place. They have events, theatre, they've got a cafe, they've got a restaurant. So I used to take him there for lunch or dinner. So I have a nostalgia for that place. On the night of the election result, the whole place was covered in racist graffiti. And I thought, wait a minute, this place has been here
Oh my goodness.
for 50, 60 years and is partly here as acknowledgement of the Poles' involvement with England and the Allies during the Second World War. So it seemed particularly ironic. So I posted something about it on Facebook, and I started to get all this hate mail. People writing to me saying, "We won, you lost. Why don't you fuck off home?" It just made me realize just how divisive that whole argument had become, and how it had legitimized these really unpleasant right-wing tendencies in people. And it's the danger of populist politics, I think. And we see it in England with Boris, and we see it particularly in America with Donald Trump, proselytizing simplistic answers to very complicated questions, and it's genuinely quite scary, I think.
It is indeed.
Yeah.
So this name kind of sticks out as I think one of the last King Crimson tours, or like 2 or 3 years ago, the King Crimson tour was named Uncertain Times.
It's Robert's title, and I thought I will write a song with that title. And I had the subject matter, so I wrote the song. I took it to him. He seemed to like it at first, and then he lost interest in it. And then, I'll do it then. So I need to give him a writing credit for the title alone. But yeah, it was indeed the name of a Crimson tour a few years back. Yeah.
Back then already, I felt it pretty poignant for that time already, but now a couple of years later, even more so, which is, as you said, quite scary. But you just mentioned a couple of times already that you tend to do these writing sessions with Robert every now and then. So is there any hope that there's something coming out of that at some point?
Spit it out. You mean, will there be a new King Crimson album? Is that what you're asking? Listen, there's enough material. We have within our repertoire already somewhere in the region of 40 minutes plus, I think, of new stuff. And as I say, there's other stuff written that we haven't adapted, and I don't think that's the issue. I think the issue is it's down to Robert, really, as are all things Crimson. I think there is an issue in a way, in that, even before the pandemic, we live in a different world. We used to tour to promote an album, and now we tour because that's how we earn our living.
Yeah.
And if anything, if you have an album out at the same time, it's almost a memento of the tour rather than the other way around, because sales are through the floor, and that kind of world doesn't exist anymore. So I'm sure that's part of the reason. It's a big band, and whilst I'm sure we could do this by file sharing, I'm sure Robert would rather we were all in a room together. Mm-hmm. But that's quite an undertaking, and a costly one at that. And of course, in this current climate, we can't even do it.
Yeah,
we can't fly the Americans over to England, and all the inherent equipment and everything. So our manager, when asked this question, is fond of replying with the following answer: there are no plans to record a new King Crimson album. However, there are no plans not to.
That's a very diplomatic answer,
isn't it? So I'm going to stick with that.
Talking about King Crimson, you've been a part of that legendary band for quite some years now, and did many tours in the last years. I always wondered, as a singer, do you take a different approach on the different eras? If you sing a song that was originally sung by Greg Lake or John Wetton or Adrian Bellew, or do you just disregard what was before and make it your own?
Well, I guess the truth is that I was 13 when I first saw King Crimson live, so all that music, that's what I was listening to. So that all of those albums informed the way that I sing anyway.
Okay.
Right. So I sing them like me. That's what I'm trying to do. I'm not deliberately trying to sound like anybody, but I think the fact that my kind of musical DNA was immersed in all of that stuff as I was growing up means that if it does work, and hopefully it does, that's why, you know, because how I sing was informed by the people that sang that stuff originally. Adrian Belew's stuff is a different matter altogether. But I still see no point in doing anything other than trying to sing like me, which is why, you know, when Robert suggested we do In Discipline, I thought, I don't know how I can do this. Because the verses are like kind of, you know, very American beat poetry, really. And I thought, well, how can I do that? And Robert's original suggestion was, why don't you write brand new lyrics and make them very English and make them very personal to you? And I tried that, and I thought, I don't feel comfortable with this. But then I thought, you know what? There's music going on. Why don't I write a melody to the existing lyric? And of course, the scan of the words means that the melody is not a kind of standard melody. And then, as a consequence, I recorded the guitar playing the melody that I'd written, and then I recorded the vocal on top of it, using it as a guide. And I think I must have accidentally given Robert a mix with the guitar in. And he said, actually keep the guitar in. I think it sounds great, like you're scatting it. So then we ended up with actually quite a different version of the song, which I think works on its own terms and is not merely a replica of the original.
That's very cool. Any favorite King Crimson songs to perform for you personally?
Well, they kind of change.
Okay.
And sometimes, you know, sometimes a favorite is partly down to the venue you're performing it in. For instance, singing Epitaph in Hiroshima was an extraordinary moment. The venue in Hiroshima is literally about a 2-minute walk from where the bomb went off. It's right next to the museum. So that, you know, that stands out. I love singing Islands. That version of the band was the band I first saw live. And I loved that album, and I love Boz's singing. He's much maligned by some of the Crimson fan base, but I thought he was fantastic. I love singing Easy Money. Oh, I don't know. As I say, it changes.
Funnily enough, just on my way here to the studio, I was specifically listening to Easy Money and Epitaph from the Radical Action to whatever the long name is of that album. And as I was listening to Epitaph and you singing it, I was thinking, wow, this is much like Uncertain Times. This still rings so true, and
yeah, absolutely,
It kind of hit me because that always since I discovered King Crimson and all the old stuff, that was one song that stood out for me, like emotionally, as very, very hard hitting and emotionally heavy. And yeah, I was like, damn, all those years later, it's still relevant.
Yeah, I know.
So, rounding off the interview about your music, would you consider yourself a writer, a singer, or a guitar player first and foremost? Have you ever thought about that?
Well, I tell you what I do. Robert said to me he said to me, all lead singers are a pain in the ass. And I said, but I'm a singer, Robert. And he said, no, you're a guitarist that sings. Okay. So, and I guess I think I'm that. And I do think I'm a writer, a composer. But I'm not always in a place where that can be utilized in other things that I've done. But yeah, and I like to try and do different things. I've done 3 commissions for Radio 3 in England, which are like kind of quasi-classical pieces. And one of the pieces uses speech as part of the composition. And I was going to do a live version of that at the Edinburgh Festival this year as a one-man show. So yeah, I think it's probably composition more than anything. But hey, listen, I'm happy to do whatever job comes in.
All right. Here at the Progcast, we have a little section that we like to call "What's in Your Walkman?" So I would like to ask you, what have you been listening to lately? Is there anything you want to recommend to our listeners?
Yes, I do.
That sounds good.
There's a couple of things. There's a band that I have to say, I have an 18-year-old son who, in an attempt to stop me whinging on about how there's no interesting music these days, continually plays me extraordinary things that I would never have heard of. One of the things which I love is a band called Bobbing.
Okay.
And there's a track called Shrugging Match. I've forgotten the name of the album, or did I write it down? But they're brilliant, I think. Hang on. I'm a fan of. There's another band he's a fan of called Everything Everything. Do you know them?
Yes, I have heard about them, and I know a couple of my friends. They like them very much.
Yeah, there's a great song. If I were to name one tune that I like, is a song called "Schoolin'" by Everything Everything. What else? There's a band called GoGo Penguin. Do you know them?
Yes. I actually listened to their last EP or album a couple of months back. Was also a recommendation of a good friend of mine. They're really cool, jazzy.
Yeah, really good. But young guys, that's the thing. And my son is forever playing me really genuinely interesting things, and you think, wow, this is, what the hell have they been listening to? And but a lot of it's really genuinely very exciting. So I think there's some really good music out there. It's not always easy to find.
Yeah, I also have 3 recommendations for this week, for this episode, starting with organ-driven prog rock from the United States, the second album of a project called Theo. That's the prog rock project by the organist Jim Alfredson. And yeah, the second album, Figureheads, is out on Generation Prog Records since the end of September. And from Poland, actually, the guitarist of Riverside, Maciej Meller, put out, I think, his debut solo album, Zenith. And I listened to a little bit, and that sounded really good. So I'm really looking forward to exploring that album. And finally, I really can't get enough of the debut album, the self-titled debut album of the American band Gargoyl. They are kind of classified as grunge prog rock, but I definitely hear a lot of 90s King Crimson in there, and it's just a lot of fun and great vocal harmonies and really cool wanky rhythms and stuff. So that's a really, really fun album I keep coming back to. I had also the pleasure to interview the guitarist Dave a couple of weeks back. So if you haven't listened to that episode, you can go back and check that out as well. Thank you so much, Jakko, for taking the time. All the best with your solo album, Secrets and Lies, out on Inside Out now, right?
Yeah.
And yeah, fingers crossed, we will be able to see you again next year or the year after at one point on stage.
At some point, let's hope so, yeah. For all our sakes.
Yeah, I had the pleasure of seeing you in Stuttgart a couple of years ago, and that was, I took my father, and it was a memorable evening.
Oh, brilliant. Lovely.
All right, that leaves me with my last final words for every episode. Take care of yourselves, take care of your loved ones, and listen to great music.
The Progcast is a production of Stuus Media and is presented by the Progspace. It is produced by Randy M. Salo, Janine Stengel-Lewis, Blake Lewis, and Dario Albrecht. Our theme music is by This Is Not an Elephant, and Van Kirsch does our graphics. New episodes of the Progcast drop every Monday and Thursday. And don't miss our Friday Top 5 episode where we discuss our favorite new releases from that week. For more interviews and reviews in the written form, check out theprogspace.com.